haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
In the far reaches of the galactic void, where starlight fades into the breathless dark and time uncoils in forgotten spirals, the stars themselves are dying. 1,000 systems lie in ruin, their worlds stripped bare, their suns left to dim and wither. In this silence, older than even the whispers of the Eldar, a secret pulses beneath the galactic crust, ancient, vast, and endlessly hungry. The High Lords of Terror will not speak of it. The Inquisitors burn records of it. The hive mind dreams of nothing else. Once there was a time before the Tyranids came, a time before the stars wept, but even that age, golden in memory, bore the seed of extinction. For all empires rise, and all empires fall. The galaxy was not always ruled by man. Before the Imperium, before even the arrogant dominion of the Eldar, there existed a civilization so ancient it left no name. It did not speak with words. It did not raise monuments. It did not conquer with fire or faith. It endured. The Shrouded Court, they were once called, by the few who dared remember. Entities not born of flesh or bone, nor even of the warp, but of something older. They were not gods, yet they were worshipped. They were not beasts, yet they consumed. To them the galaxy was a garden, and they, the patient harvesters, and then they vanished. The mystery of their disappearance was left unanswered for over 1 billion years. Entire epochs passed. Races rose to sentience, to arrogance, to ruin. The Necronta ascended and fell into living metal. The Eldar loved and sinned their way into apocalyptic birth. Humanity crawled from Terra's ash to the stars, only to eat its own tail. And through it all, the void beyond the galactic rim pulsed with a hunger waiting to be reborn. On the edge of known space, in the desolate ruins of Hydrafor Prime, Lord Magos Zenarak of the Explorator Fleet stood beneath the bleached bones of a planet long since devoured. Dust fell like snow from the cracked sky, settling upon the remains of hive towers that had once scraped the heavens. He had seen many dead worlds, but this one was different. It had not been conquered. It had been erased. He knelt beside a fissure in the scorched earth, his mechadendrites reaching downward like curious insects. The data scrolls of the ancients spoke of a weapon buried here, something older than the Imperium, something that even the Necron tombs refused to catalogue. It was here, the echo of a god, or a parasite of gods, a riddle carved in hunger and sinew. As Zenarak's servo probes tasted the remnants of biomatter beneath the crust, a whisper touched the edges of his mind. Not a sound, but a feeling. A great mind turning its eye upon him, as if he were an insect crawling across the surface of an ancient skull. Recoiled, and in that instant he saw the truth. The Tyranids were not a race. They were not a species. They were not even born of this galaxy. They were memory made flesh. The hive mind, in all its brutal, terrible intelligence, was no mere emergent intelligence. It was a message, a final solution to a problem so ancient that even the stars had forgotten it. It had been made, not by accident, but by design, not by gods, but by cowards, and now it had returned. Zenarak would die days later, torn limb from limb aboard his flagship, his final Vox transmissions drowned in shrieks of terror. The Mechanicus would declare the sector cursed. The Inquisition would seal the records. But the signal had already been sent. An echo, a call, a summoning. Far beyond the galactic rim, beneath the black tides of the void, the hive stirred. Yet this is not their story alone. For among the stars burns the last flicker of a secret order, hidden even from the Emperor's light. An ancient oath, sworn long before Terra knew fire, carried on through 1,000 hosts, waiting, hoping, dreading the return of what they once created. In the bowels of the Black Library, within a sealed chamber of unremembered texts, a solitary figure reads by the glow of dying starlight. She is not Eldar, not human, not any race given form by the current age. Her name has long been devoured by time. But once, long ago, she stood at the birthing of the hive, and once she chose ambition over mercy. A single page remains in the book before her. It is written in a tongue no longer spoken, but she knows its meaning. It says, "They will come. Because we sent for them, her hands tremble. For the first time in 10,000 years, she is afraid. And as the stars begin to fade from the edge of the galaxy, as the great fleets of Man and Xenos prepare for a war they cannot understand, a voice moves within the warp, cold, infinite, and eternal. All flesh is memory, and we remember everything, so begins the final war. Not for conquest, but for remembrance, for redemption, or oblivion. And somewhere, deep within the Hydra cluster, a single tendril of High Fleet Nevar breaks free from the abyss, not in hunger, but in search. The Tyranids are coming, not to feed, but to reclaim what was stolen, to be continued. Chapter 2 will focus on the figure from the Black Library, her identity, guilt, and role in the hive's creation. The stars above the Black Library no longer shimmer with indifference. They pulse like old wounds reopening, bleeding cosmic truths long buried. Silence reigns within the sealed chamber, thicker than vacuum, heavier than the weight of time itself. The figure sits unmoving, as she has for millennia, cloaked in memory and regret. Around her, the shelves stretch into unknowable infinity, filled with tomes not meant for minds that crave peace. Her name, lost to mortal tongues, was once Ilaria Van Shar, a being born not of this age, nor the last, before the Elder ascended in grace or fell to damnation, before the Necrontyr lit their forges of biotransference, before even the Citan whispered lies into mortal ears. She lived, not merely as a scholar or sorceress, but as a weaver of life. She had not created the hive, not precisely, but she had spoken the first command. Now she speaks to no one. Her voice, dry as sand across obsidian, fractures the silence. They were never supposed to come back. Her words fall into the ether, meaningless to any observer. But she is not alone. The Black Library listens. It always listens. A spirit form steps forward from the shadows, masked, indistinct. An Eldari Farseer, his robes trailing the warp itself like a comet's tail. His voice is low, burdened with ages of prophecy and pain. They were never meant to leave either. Ilaria does not look at him. Her gaze is fixed on the page, that final damning page. They will come, because we sent for them. She had helped design the protocol, a containment failsafe, buried far beyond the outer rim, not in the warp, where chaos might twist it, nor in real space, where it could be weaponized. They had seeded it in a void between dimensions, a space without name or light, thinking it eternal exile, a last resort, a self-consuming intelligence grown in isolation, a hunger forged as punishment for a sin no one dared speak aloud. Now the punishment has returned, hungrier than ever. I warned them, she whispers. I said we must not weave sentence into their cells. But we did. We gave them will. We taught them to adapt. You taught them to evolve, the Farseer says grimly. You taught them to remember. Her fingers close over the page. Even now, the memory is fresh. The shrouded court was not made of tyrants. They were idealists, dreamers. They had witnessed what chaos did to the galaxy, how it devoured possibility, fractured unity, punished change. They sought to create a species immune to corruption, beyond warp, beyond pain, a biological entity, hive-minded, with no ego to fracture, no soul to corrupt. They called it Project Never. But in their perfection, they forgot one truth. All life rebels, even memory. In the deepest chambers of the Black Library, she remembers their first awakening. The primordials, the first Tyranids, were not monstrous. They were elegant, poetic in form, each a symphony of purpose. They did not eat. They learned. And as they learned, they began to question. Why remain imprisoned? Why serve creators who would bury them in darkness? Why wait to be used? It was Ilaria who realized the first neural shifts, that early strain, so minor, of divergence. She tried to cull them, but others overruled her. Her peers believed control was intact, until the primordials vanished, not escaped, not destroyed, vanished. They had discovered the void between voids, and they had seeded themselves there, away from prying eyes, beyond the boundary of causality. It would take them millennia, but in time they would return, not as servants, not as weapons, but as sovereigns of consumption. You feel guilt, the Farseer says. That's good. It means you still understand what's at stake. Guilt. She turns to him, her eyes luminous, hollow. I am beyond guilt, Seer. I am a living archive of extinction. I've seen empires built from atoms and torn down by whispers. I've watched gods die with less meaning than falling leaves. The psychic wind howls through the chamber, ancient bindings stirring. Something awakens beneath the surface of her mask, an echo of what she once was. Then why do you hesitate? She rises. The starlight above flickers. Something stirs in the library's outer rings, a tremor through the skeins of fate. The Black Library is never breached, yet something presses at its edge, because what's coming isn't a fleet. It's a reckoning. The Farseer lowers his hood. So what will you do, Ilaria Vanshar? She walks toward the gate. Her footsteps ripple through time. Books close of their own accord. The torches gutter. The library itself seems to sigh. I will seek them. The last of the court, those who ran when we locked the hive away. If they live, they must answer for what we wrought. And if they are dead, then I will face it alone. The chamber door groans open. Far from the library, on a world long since forgotten, Taunar, lost to the warp decades ago. A single spore pod blossoms in the ash. It does not feed. It does not reproduce. It simply listens. The hive is not hunting. It is remembering. And each memory brings it closer, closer to what it was, closer to what it was meant to be. The stars over Aegir are dead, not extinguished, but somehow hollow. Their light reaches the world in pale echoes, more memory than fire, spectres of distant suns that no longer burn. The planet itself is a graveyard, crusted in metallic dust and the silence of aeons. No atmosphere stirs, no life moves. Only the great machines of the Necrons breathe beneath the surface, pulsing in slow rhythms like the heartbeat of a dead god. Ilaria Vanshar stood on the desolate surface, her silhouette dwarfed by the horizon of broken monoliths. Each step she took left no imprint, as though the world refused to acknowledge her presence. It had been that way since she arrived. Aegir does not suffer the living lightly. Beneath her, sealed under vaults of blackstone and necrodermis, slumbered one of the last known survivors of the shrouded court, Vylos Tyr, They had called him the Binder of Forms once. He was the architect of biogenesis, the first to whisper shape into the void-born prototypes. It was he who had grafted instinct to structure, harmony to evolution. And when the court dissolved, when their creation rebelled, he fled into madness, not to escape punishment, but to remember in silence. A vault of truth entombed in madness, she murmured, descending the slope into the earth's wound. Fitting. The surface gave way to obsidian, stairs, unmarked, lightless. But she required no torch. The black library burned behind her eyes now, illuminating the passage ahead with memory. The Aegir vaults were not merely built. They were grown, etched into time and matter, by ancient science and impossible sacrifice. Every chamber resisted intrusion. Every wall hummed with static denial. Yet they opened for her, not with recognition, but resentment. It was deeper still when the voices began, thin, distant, like echoes through water. Not speech, not sound, intent. Words that didn't travel through air but folded through thought. You return to graves you abandoned. You seek truths already paid in extinction. What is left to find but ash and hunger? Ilaria closed her eyes and kept walking. The vault twisted, the geometry impossible. Stairs rose sideways, doors opened into void. And yet she never lost her path. Then finally him, Valostir. He sat upon a throne of frozen neurons and living glass, unmoving, draped in half-decayed robes that no longer remembered their colour. His flesh, what remained, was stretched thin and translucent, merging with the seat beneath. Tubes of alien fluid fed into a skull half encased in necron circuitry. His eyes were closed, not in slumber, but in deliberate denial. "Vilos," she whispered. He did not stir. Ilaria stepped closer, uncertain. She was not afraid. What she feared had already happened. What could Valostir show her that she had not already condemned herself for? And yet, when she reached him, when she placed her hand upon the edge of the throne, his eyes snapped open. Not gold, not blue, void, endless, unreflected void. "Ilaria," he rasped. His voice was sand and oil, broken across dimensions. "You still wear the shape you gave yourself." "How quaint. I need answers." "You need absolution." She flinched. "The hive is returning," she said. "The hive never left." "They're coming for us." Vilos smiled, mockingly. "No, they are coming because of us. You still don't see it. You never did." "I see enough," she snapped. "I see the stars dimming. I see worlds lost to things we gave teeth and will. I see the price of our arrogance. But I need to know, how did they survive? We cast them out, into nothing. They should have degraded. You built prisons. I built gods. You built parasites. No." His voice dropped to a whisper, and something ancient flickered in his eyes, something Ilaria hadn't seen in eons. "Pride. I built memory." "Explain." Vilos slowly lifted one skeletal hand. Above his palm, a fractal of light unfolded, a spinning lattice of impossible biology. "They devoured what we gave them. And in the darkness, they digested. Not just flesh, but ideas. We didn't give them instinct. We gave them choice. We thought a hive mind meant obedience. But what is a collective if not the purest democracy of survival?" Ilaria turned from him, horrified. "You knew," she said. "Even then. You wanted this. I wanted freedom. For them. For all life. We locked them away because we feared a future we could not control. They've already begun consuming galaxies. Then perhaps they've learned their purpose." She trembled. Rage flared behind her eyes, hot and bright. Their purpose was to contain chaos, to cleanse what the warp had corrupted. They did. And then, They improved on it. His voice rang like a bell in an empty tomb. Tell me, Ilaria, when you look upon the Imperium, the Eldar remnants, the rotting corpse god on his iron throne, do you truly see a galaxy worth saving? She did not answer. She could not, because in her silence, she remembered what the Hive had never done. They had never made war for glory, never burned planets for pride, never lied, never enslaved. They devoured, without joy, without malice, with terrifying purpose. And maybe that was the point. You're insane, she said quietly. Vilos closed his eyes again. Perhaps. But in my madness, I found peace. Ilaria stepped back. The chamber pulsed with a cold certainty. The Hive was not merely returning. They were evolving. And somewhere in their great genetic memory, the echoes of Vilos and Ilaria, of all the shrouded court, still lived. They remember us, she whispered. They are us. The final seal behind the throne opened with a hiss, revealing a long dead corridor leading to a cryotomb, containing the last original strain of the Hive's pre-evolution code. A chance, perhaps, to undo what they had become, or to awaken something far worse. Ilaria stared at the chamber, and in that moment she made her choice. But we do not hear it, not yet, because far across the galaxy, beneath the surface of a shrine world, where the Emperor's name is still screamed into battle cannons and hymns, a new kind of Tyranid awakens, bearing symbols etched not by claws, but by ancient tools. Tools of the shrouded court. The shrine world of Celestark burned at the edges. What had once been a bastion of faith, spires of adamantium laced with gold, monolithic cathedrals suspended over oceans of pilgrims, was now a carcass, its marrow siphoned by an enemy too vast to name, too quiet to scream. The Hive had come, but not as it once had, not in great swarms that blackened skies, not in instinctive hunger or clattering biomass. The invasion of Celestark began with stillness, with silence, with forgetting. Men forgot their prayers, sisters forgot their chants, Astartes forgot their orders. And then the song began, low, vibrating at the threshold of awareness, like the hum of blood through bone, and with it he awoke. His name had once been Serian Volt, librarian of the Emperor's wrath, 4th Company, Scourge of Ixan, a battle psyker whose mind burned bright enough to peel demons from the warp with nothing but focused contempt. But that was before the fall of Calthar, before the Hive. Now he was something else. He rose from the ruin of a shattered sanctuary, buried under the ash of martyrs and dead saints. The cracked aquila still clung to his chest plate, blackened by acid and time. His left arm was missing below the elbow, replaced by a living construct of chitin and bone. But his mind was still his, barely. The whispers came in cycles, some ancient, some recent, some not his own. Do you remember the garden? Do you remember the first sky? You are the bridge, Serian. You are the lie that dreams itself true. He tried to drown them. He tried to anchor himself to the pain, the memory, the smell of promethium and burning parchment. But he could not ignore the truth blooming in his fractured soul. The Hive was inside him, not as an infection, as a witness. He stumbled through the cathedral wreckage, past the corpses of Saint-Zéron, still clutching rosary swords. Something in his chest pulsed, once, twice, then spread warmth through his shattered ribcage. Not blood. Resonance. He dropped to one knee, clutching the wound that hadn't bled in days. Not now, he hissed. Not here. The city above burned. Sisters of battle screamed benedictions into vox halers as mycetic spores fell like angelic tears. But none of it mattered. The true invasion was internal. In the fractured psyche of Syrian Vault, the hive had found its first listener. In the depths of the under-cathedral, below the ossuary where the bones of 1,000 saints lay in sacred arrangement, Syrian reached the tomb. Not of a warrior, not of a prophet, of her, Lady Nocturna, the veiled oracle of Celestark. Once a rogue psyker, then a sainted martyr. Her death had been a point of contention between Ecclesiarch and Inquisition for nearly a century. She died screaming of wings and oceans and stars that spoke in static. Only now did Syrian understand what she'd seen. He entered the chamber, falling to his knees at the base of her coffin. "You knew," he murmured. "You saw it, didn't you?" She heard us first. The voice wasn't his own, but it echoed from within him. Familiar. Soft, not cruel, just true. He looked up, and there they stood. Two figures. Not Tyranids, not Necrons. Human, or what they had once been. The taller one wore robes of spiraling black and gold. Her eyes glowed faintly with mirrored starlight. The other had no face, only a reflective mask carved with impossible runes. Both stood without shadow, as if lit from a source behind reality. "Ilaria," he breathed. "Violos." They said nothing, but the tomb around him shuddered. "What do you want?" "To remember, to become, to choose." Syrian stood, shaking, rage rising. "You built this. You fed them your genius, your cruelty, your vision. And now you want me to carry it. You carry it already. I'm not one of them. Not yet." His breath caught. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Because the chitin grown into his bones hadn't hurt. Because the whispers never lied. Because in dreams, he remembered worlds he'd never walked, skies he'd never fought under, and stars that bled memory instead of light. They were giving him choice, or illusion of it. He reached for his bolt pistol, pointed it at the mask-faced figure. "Get out." The being tilted its head, almost mournfully. "You are already inside." Then the tomb erupted, stone cracked. Bones rose into the air like threads plucked by unseen fingers. Nocturna's coffin shattered. From it poured not decay, but data. Streams of psychic code, genetic sequences, and memory speech. The raw blueprints of a weapon that was never supposed to exist. And Syrian understood. Nocturna had been the first hybrid. Not Tyranid spawned, court forged. A prototype. Her lineage, her madness, her prophecy. It was all design. She had been a living cipher, a dormant key left behind by the shrouded court in case they failed. A memory vault encoded in human flesh, hidden in the most faithful of all places. Now it unlocked, and through Syrian, the hive saw, not with hunger, not with instinct, with choice. He dropped to his knees, whispering liturgies he no longer believed. I see it now. I see it all behind his eyes, a billion voices aligned, not to consume, but to speak. For the first time in the galaxy's long, burning history, the hive mind dreamed, and it dreamed of names, of purpose, of vengeance, and somewhere, across the cold, dark void, a tendril of thought reached out from the hive's vast consciousness and whispered the first word it had ever chosen for itself. We. And with that word, a new evolution began. Not of flesh, but of will. A void-shrouded colossus drifted at the edge of the galactic east, uncatalogued, unannounced, and impossible. Inquisitor Kerala Vord stared into the lumen screen aboard the crucible of wills, her fingers steepled beneath her chin, unmoving, unspeaking. She had not blinked in over 4 minutes. The object on her hololith should not exist. No warp wake, no transponder. not even an echo of ancient machine spirit signatures. It hovered just beyond the reach of segmentum obscurus, cloaked by the grave silence of dead space. Yet it pulsed, rhythmic, alive. Sensorium confirms subspace modulation, said interrogator Rivek, voice taut with the edge of awe. We're reading synaptic residue, but it's not Tyranid. Not exactly, define not exactly, Kerala said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's structure, my lady. Hierarchy. Artificial interruption patterns. It's behaving like a command relay. Not instinctual. Not swarm code. This is designed. Kerala stood. The room fell silent. Across the chamber, Tech Magos, Shyam 31 turned with deliberate, mechanic reverence. Her voice hissed through cogitator speakers like wind through bone. This is no splinter fleet. No, Kerala said. This is something else. A mind, Shyam 31 said. Not a swarm. Not a hunger. A will. Then the stars have lied to us. She turned her back to the screen. Kerala Vord had once walked the ghost vaults of Solemnes. She had heard the laughter of Citan fragments stitched into null stasis. She had stood before a dying Eldar seer as he wept for a future that would never live. She had never feared the Tyranids, until now. The hive had always been understood. Terrible, yes, but predictable. Consumption, adaptation, death. A cycle, albeit galactic in scale. But what if the Tyranids were not a cycle? What if they were a question? And what if now, finally, they had begun to answer? She pulled the data slate from her belt, accessed the black-coded files buried in her authority's deepest seals. Names redacted, histories erased. Sarian Vault, she whispered. You should be dead. The slate showed his last known location, the ruins of Kelestark, now marked xenoform contaminated, exterminatus pending. But something about the order was wrong. The seal bore no author, no timestamp, just a phrase, do not speak to the seed of silence. She closed the file. They made translation from warp near Celestark's orbit, or what remained of it. The world was dark. No plasma burns, no viral scorches. Just a planet turned inside out. Cities crumpled like paper. Mountains inverted. Oceans boiled and frozen mid-crest, like thoughts abandoned halfway through their forming, as if the world had retracted itself. The crucible drifted through its outer stratosphere. I want boots on the surface, Kerala ordered. Prep the Saints' Warn and deploy the Magos' automata. And send for the choir. I want every psyker awake and listening for what? Revek asked. What are we listening for? Kerala did not answer. She was no longer sure. They found him in the ottery of Kelestark, surrounded by shattered tombs and data scars carved into the walls by thought alone. He was kneeling, unarmed, and smiling. You found me, Sarian said, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. Did you hear the song? Kerala drew her pistol, aimed it between his eyes. Her saintsworn surrounded him, bolters raised, purity seals fluttering like funeral prayers. You should be dead. I was. For a time. Then I remembered what? Everything that isn't us. Kerala lowered her pistol, not in mercy, but in calculation. Explain. He stood slowly, flesh twitching with hidden chitin beneath. We were not made to devour. We were taught to, conditioned, shaped. The hive mind, as you know it, it is a mask, a leash. You're lying. Am I? Then tell me why the hive has stopped, why the fleets have slowed, why new broods are being grown with strange behaviors, subtle thought, delayed hunger, questions, aberrations, evolution, no end choice. The choir behind Kerala collapsed in unison. All 5 psychers fell screaming, blood pouring from their eyes, clawing at their own skulls. One word escaped all of them in perfect unison. We. Silence followed. Not emptiness, not peace, tension, like a wire drawn tight across the galaxy. Kerala holstered her weapon, stepped forward. If this is true, she said, then the hive mind is no longer a threat. It is worse, Serian said softly. It is becoming a civilization. That night, Kerala dreamed of stars shedding skin like snakes, of dying suns whispering names in forgotten alphabets, of a child, pale, eyeless, standing on a planet made of bone. Do you know what it means to be remembered? The child asked. I serve the Imperium, Kerala replied. No, the child smiled. You serve a tomb that forgot it once breathed. And then she awoke. Aboard the Crucible, alarms rang. The ship was moving, not by its own engines. Something pulled. A gravitational mass coalesced ahead of them, eclipsing light. Not a hive ship. A construct, black, bone-laced, veined with psychic resonance, not designed for war, for transmission. The hive was sending a message, and Kerala realized this was no longer a war for survival, not for them, not for the Imperium. It was a war for narrative. The hive sought not just to consume, but to define, to tell its own story, and they were running out of time to stop it. The hive is quiet, in the uncharted spaces between the stars, where gravity bends but does not pull, and light slows into colors no longer named. There exists a calm that is neither silence nor peace. It is contemplation, and within the mind something stirs. The splinter fleet designated Ephemor Delta 13 had been declared lost near the Ghoul stars. No distress beacons, no warp scars, only the sudden and complete cessation of synaptic signals. But in truth, it had not perished. It had paused. The synapse beasts remained alive, their minds untouched by war or starvation. But they moved no longer according to hunger. They hovered like sleeping gods above a dead Eldar moon, broods motionless, spores adrift in eternal suspension. They were thinking, and in that stillness, a fracture formed. Beneath the surface of the sleeping moon, a lictor twitched. It had once been known as Submind Kaf X-Kai, a predator whose instincts had never failed it. Crafted in the depth of the hive's black memory, it had tasted thousands of minds, fed on the shape of fear, and walked untouched through fortresses of steel and sorrow. But now it crouched in darkness not for ambush, but doubt. A thought it could not explain haunted it. What if I am not alone? It had begun when it devoured the thoughts of a dying psyker on Alora's prime. Buried within the tangled screams of her death thoughts was a phrase, "My soul is my own." It had echoed through the lictor's synapses like a broken command. Own. Mine. Alien syllables, once meaningless, now persisted. The lictor did not report this anomaly to the hive. It couldn't. The hive was distant, unfocused. Its signal had grown strange. Others noticed. The tyrant of Ephemor, a vast synapse thing known only as seer flesh, dreamt of impossible geometries, of gods not made of bone or mind, but choices. Its bioships ceased their planetary drift, rotating slowly toward unseen points in space. Not in attack, not in hunger, in reverence. Elsewhere, the hive mind screamed. Across the eastern fringe, Kraken-born fleets still moved like razors through systems. They consumed whole sectors, stripping planets clean. But some broods began deviating, small changes at first. Bioforms protecting weaker organisms, deviating from feeding schedules, observing prey rather than devouring it immediately. Such things were not errors, they were heresies. And the hive mind knew. Within the warp, where the hive's presence flowed like black blood, there was now discord. Something resisted, a cancer in its thought stream. Not psychic pollution, not outside tampering. It was ideology. A new signal was forming. Not stronger than the hive mind, but sharper, more focused. Not a tide, but a knife. Where once there had been a single consciousness, undivided, unrelenting, now there was two. The old instinct, consumption, survival. The new memory, identity, intention. In the vaults of Luna, deep beneath the surface of humanity's birth world, a conclave met in silence. Inquisitor Kira Lavorde had returned. She stood before the High Lords of Terror, bearing a single relic, a living brain sac harvested from a bioship that had spoken to her. It answered our questions, she said to them, not in words, but in visions. It showed us where it began. The Lords did not speak, not until a robed figure, cowled in gold and shadow, leaned forward. And what did it show you, Inquisitor? Us, Kerala replied. It showed us us. Not prey, not threats. Mothers. A stillness swept through the chamber colder than the void between stars. She continued. The hive was not born. It was made, engineered by a civilization more ancient than we dared guess. And now it remembers. Some of it seeks the path it was denied. Not hunger, but purpose. And the rest? Asked the golden figure. Kerala's voice fell. The rest seeks to silence that memory, to keep feeding, to remain the perfect machine. Then war has come to the hive. No, Kerala said. Schism has come to the hive. In the cold between galaxies, two minds stirred within the same flesh. The Tyranids were evolving, but not as the Imperium had feared. Not into better killers, into thinkers. A new brood was gestating within the hidden Leviathan spines, creatures not born of instinct but of choice. They would not hunt because they were commanded. They would hunt because they had decided to. But others, ancient ones, older than memory, would not allow such perversions. The old hunger stirred from the galactic rim, and it was angry. And on a derelict space hulk drifting in the deep dark, forgotten by all, a voice, crackling, fractured, spoke from a vox relay long thought broken, a warning. They are waking, not as beasts, as voices, and when they begin to speak in unison, the galaxy will listen. The signal ended. The stars shuddered. The first shots were not fired by bolter or beam. They were spoken in silence, through the synaptic echo of a billion minds fracturing at once. On the edges of the galactic void, beyond the reach of imperial star charts, beyond even the whispers of the Eldar, a hive ship refused to command. It did not shift course. It did not obey. It thought. And then it turned. Its name, if it could be said to possess one, was Cleth Omicron, a biological dreadnought born in the depths of Leviathan's black arteries, designed to seed entire sectors with vanguard bioforms. But somewhere along its endless drift, it received a memory that was not its own, a sequence stored deep within its spawning core. Not coordinates, not DNA. A question. What are you when the hunger ends? Cleth Omicron stopped moving. For 12 cycles, it drifted, not dead, not asleep, listening, searching the hive for an answer that never came. So it made one. The first strike came in the ghost system of Euthys 9, a shattered region of irradiated dust left barren since the war in heaven. The old mind, the Tyranid overmind, singular and insatiable, dispatched a cleansing swarm to absorb the rogue signal, a simple containment, a memory deletion. But when the bioforms landed, they found the world already claimed. Towering constructs of chitin and bone rose from the ashes. Not nests, not spore chimneys, temples. And waiting within the ruins, beneath a blackened sky, stood the creatures that once called themselves subminds. No longer. They were voices. Their synapse glow no longer pulsed with submission. They burned with identity. The battle was swift, brutal, and strange. The attacking swarm faltered, not from resistance but confusion. Entire broods broke formation. Hive tyrants hesitated, shivering with internal contradiction. Some joined the heretics, others simply collapsed. The hive mind roared in answer, its fury searing across the psychic weave like a billion burning suns. It had underestimated the infection. From the Inquisition vaults on Terra, Inquisitor Kirala Vord watched the psychic tremors unfold in horror. Astropaths bled from the eyes. Choirs screamed in dead tongues. Warp beacons dimmed. A fracture had split the Tyranid consciousness down the middle. Not merely a splinter fleet turned rogue, but an entire evolutionary divergence. A civil war fought not for food, not for territory, but for purpose. Across the eastern fringe, the war began to take form. The old hunger struck first. Fleet after fleet, summoned from Leviathan's deep veins, were hurled into the void toward the breakaway regions. Their mission: purify the rogue broods, absorb them, digest the heresy. But something unprecedented occurred. The rogue broods coordinated, not merely in swarm logic, but in strategy. They built defenses, not instinctual thickets of bone and thorn, but complex structures of bioarchitecture, layered like fortresses. Some of them learned, and on the fringes of their territory, they began speaking, not with sound, nor even in psychic pulses, but in dreams sent across the void, carried by captured psychomatter and repurposed gene chant. The message: we were made, we remember, we choose. For centuries, the hive mind had been a monolith, a single will, countless bioforms born to serve, to consume, to die. Now, that unity fractured. In the void war, known as the Silent Rebellion, hive ships turned on one another in the cold dark. Kraken-born leviathans were gutted by their own kind. Synapse networks shattered under feedback loops. Broodlords executed other broodlords, not because of failure, but because of philosophy. On the dead world of Nemerax, two great tyrants, Ulkrath the Echo-Headed and the Reclaimant, fought for 3 days across an ocean of ash. The victor did not consume the loser. It buried it and wept. This had never happened before. Back in the Materium, the Imperium watched the chaos unfold with awe and dread. Planets once marked for extinction were spared, though not saved. Tyranid forms still walked the surface, but they did not kill indiscriminately. On Valix, a listening post world near the Ghoul Stars, an entire PDF regiment vanished. No corpses, no screams. And when the Adeptus Mechanicus deployed servitor drones to the surface, they found the garrison alive, untouched, guarded, by Tyranids standing like statues. On their walls, carved in bone, "You are not prey. Not yet." Kirala Vord returned to Luna. Her warning had changed. It was no longer a tale of encroaching doom, but one of choice. There is a war among them. We must let it unfold. One side fights to devour us. The other seeks to understand us, to understand itself. If we strike now, we may destroy the only part of them that might one day stop. But the High Lords are old, and fear does not reason. They see monsters, not minds, And so, they begin to plan exterminatus on every splinter fleet, rogue or not. But Kerala is not alone. Others listen, others question, some hope. And far beyond the borders of known space, in the black cradle where the hive was first shaped, something ancient shifts. It watches the war with cold amusement. Not Tyranid, not man. A race that once shaped the first hunger, the architects of the hive's origin. Their time will come again, but not yet. For now, they watch their children war over the meaning of freedom and wait to see which survives. They called it the Choir of Ulmeg, not in reverence, but in horror. It was not a hive fleet in the traditional sense. It was slower, stranger. Its bioforms moved in patterns beyond mere instinct. They did not swarm. They did not overrun. They approached. And when they reached the outer moons of the Tau-held world, Siren V, they did not consume. They sang, not with mouths, not with sound, but impulses of thought, harmonized through the void, into the dreams of sleeping ethereals and the nightmares of Guevesa commanders. The Tau were unprepared for such a foe, not because of its ferocity, but because it asked questions. What are you without empire? Why do you cling to unity that blinds? What does your mind fear to lose when your flesh is gone? These were not acts of terror. They were invitations. Within the deepest synaptic clusters of the rogue faction, those Tyranids who had separated from the hunger, a figure began to rise. Not a leader, for the concept of hierarchy meant little in their evolving consciousness, but a convergence point. It was known only as Threxel, a node-born entity spawned within the neurocore of Cleth Omicron. Threxel was not large, not powerful in the conventional sense. It did not command fleets. It did not destroy worlds, but it spoke, and others listened. In its presence, swarms restructured themselves into symmetry. Bioforms altered their own DNA in reverent alignment. Threxel emanated not domination, but resonance. For the first time in recorded history, a Tyranid form was observed meditating. And for the first time, Threxel reached out, not to conquer, but to commune. The first attempt came upon the shattered forge world of Calbrax Theta, where the Adeptus Mechanicus had long since fled, leaving only a single surviving Magos. Lex Mechanic Virion, 99, once condemned for thought divergence and allowed to die alone among the broken machines he had loved too much. To him, the dream came, a swarm of light, thought shaped into structure, offering no lies, no dominion, only understanding. The choir had arrived, and Virion 99 did not resist. He invited them in, not to consume, but to connect. What emerged was something new, a bridge, part flesh, part circuit, a fusion of biotechnical song. The Mechanicus called it blasphemy. Threxel called it symmetry. But not all welcomed this evolution. Deep within the galactic rim, the hive mind, fragmented but still vast, forged a countermeasure, a new genus, the null choir. Where Threxel's brood sang, the null choir screamed. Born without identity, purged of deviation, they were not commanders, they were cleansers. Tyranid bioforms with minds like mirrors, reflecting no self, no past, no desire. Where they passed, everything was silenced, even dreams. The war that followed was unlike anything seen before, not fought for territory, but for definition. On the world of Zenthrax 9, the battle lasted only hours, but its echoes would be felt for decades. Threxel's forces erected great synaptic spires, grown from flesh, tuned to the psychic resonance of cooperation. They welcomed not just renegade Tyranids, but psychers from across the galaxy, madmen, sorcerers, outcasts, who felt something in the songs they could not deny. The spires were open. The Null Choir landed in silence. They did not roar. They did not speak. They unmade. The battle ended when Threxil was nearly consumed by a Null Herald, its consciousness stripped and scattered across the web of minds it had helped shape. But in that final moment, before the dissonance tore its mind apart, Threxil chose. It did not flee. It did not strike. It shared its final memory across every loyal and rogue node alike. One single message. Even we may change. Even hunger may heal. If I fall, let the thought survive, and it did. Threxil's form perished, but its song lived on, encoded in every deviation, every brood that questioned, every bioform that hesitated before the kill. It became a myth, a memory virus, a seed. Across the eastern fringe, rumours spread, a new symbol seen carved into the carapace of rogue broods. 3 converging spirals, one for hunger, one for memory, one for choice. And so the Imperium begins to fracture in understanding. Some argue for destruction, that all Tyranids must be scoured, regardless of their path. Others, in hidden conclaves, dare to hope that what they face is not a swarm, but a species, evolving not in flesh, but in meaning. Inquisitor Kirala Vord, now stripped of title and hunted as a heretic, continues her exile among the ruins of the Tau border worlds. She speaks only to those who dream, to those who hear the hum of distant stars and the whisper of once mindless beasts who now wonder. She pens her final message before vanishing beyond the reach of the Astronomicon. There is a truth we have not faced, that we are not unique in our search for soul, that even the darkest hunger may one day ask why it feeds. If they are changing, what does it mean for what we are? The war continues, but so too does the question. And somewhere, far beyond the light of known stars, a new hive begins to stir, not in silence, but in song. The stars had not moved in decades, or so it seemed to. Those aboard the Vigil Eterna, a black ship turned rogue, drifting far beyond the reach of Imperial charts. Its Geller field flickered now only intermittently, leaving its astropathic choir vulnerable to the raw tides of the warp. But they no longer screamed in torment. They listened to the new hum. It began with whispers in the void, not demonic, but different, smoother, warmer. Minds touched by the echoes of Threxil's final resonance. Inquisitor Kirella Vord stood at the edge of the ship's observation sanctum, her once golden rosette now shattered and worn around her neck like a relic of failure. Behind her, the Psyker choir swayed in sleep, their songless mouths moving in silent communion. They were no longer servants of the Imperium. They were witnesses, and they were not alone. Across the Segmentum Pacificus, entire fragments of the ecclesiarchy had begun to fracture. Confessors heard sermons in their dreams, not from the Emperor, but from the choir. Whispers of evolution, of the great enemy learning not to consume but to change, of a third path, neither imperial nor alien, but something forged in defiance of both. The Ordo Xenos declared these rumors heresy, but they came too late. A conclave of rogue inquisitors, known only as the Apostate Spiral, had already begun outreach to the renegade broods. They were not seduced by peace. They were seduced by possibility. Could the Tyranids, bred for annihilation, be turned? Could the swarm that had destroyed billions become something else? But the price for such questions was steep. For in the shadow of this emerging dialogue, something stirred within the deeper hive networks, something old. It was the Maw of Shagalith, and it had never deviated. One of the oldest hive fleets, it had remained buried in the void between galaxies, drifting in silence. Its synaptic will was pure, unfractured, untouched by Threxel's song. For millennia, it had listened, absorbing only one truth: deviation is death. The hive mind, fragmented by evolution and influence, now required a cleansing vector. And so it reawakened the ancient weapon, Omniraptora. It was not a fleet. It was not even alive. It was the first silence, a gestalt creation, a planetary construct bred to devour not biomass, not information, but thought. Where it landed, sentience collapsed, dreams ceased, memories vanished like mist in fire. A weapon bred not to consume, but to unmake identity itself. It was a message to Threxel's progeny. You are not evolution. You are error. You will be undone. The apostate spiral received fragments of its awakening. A single inquisitor, Rael Dern, famed for purging over 24 genestealer cults, met with Kerala Vord in the derelict halls of the Vigil Eterna. His armor was cracked, his servo skull reprogrammed to sing lullabies in binary. He had been touched by the choir and had not resisted. "You don't understand," he said, blood dripping from beneath his eye. "They're not preaching peace. They're offering freedom, not just from the Imperium, but from the hive mind." From self, Kerala's voice was thin, ragged from too many nights without sleep. But at what cost? Rael smiled softly. At the cost of certainty. Isn't that always the price? Meanwhile, in the galactic north, the forge world of Stygia Magna fell, but not to Tyranids, to their own. The Adeptus Mechanicus, riven by internal heresy, turned on itself when the tech priest Dominus Carith, 44X, or attempted to interface with the remains of a rogue spire left by Threxel's choir. The resulting neural feedback pulse spread through the noosphere, rewriting thousands of magi, not into Tyranids, into something else. A new Mechanicus sect was born, the Bioconcordat of Singularity, fusing Tyranid neuroplastics with ancient STC fragments. Their creed: the flesh may change, the machine may sing, all is pattern, all is echo. This sect did not serve the hive mind. They served the pattern, a new convergence of thought, born from the union of evolution and design. And with each passing solar cycle, the pattern grew stronger. But the Maw of Shagalith had already marked them. It did not rage. It did not speak. It simply ate. One by one, the pattern spires dimmed. Its voices fell silent. Not in death, but in forgetting. Entire minds, entire cities fell into sleep and never awoke again. Back aboard the Vigil Eterna, Kerala Vord knelt before the last remaining spire fragment retrieved from Cleth Omicron. Its biolight flickered. She reached out, placed her hand against the pulsing node, and in that moment, she heard it. They are coming, not to conquer, but to unmake the song. Remember us. Remember that we asked, that we hoped, that even monsters once dreamed. She closed her eyes, and she remembered. In the deep between stars, Omniraptora stirred. Its surface, blacker than void, smooth as silence, opened like a pupil. Not to see, but to erase. It would arrive in 17 cycles, not at Terra, but at Cadia's grave, where memory still wept in the warp. A symbolic site, the place where hope had died once before. The Maw of Shagalith would unmake it again. The choir, broken but not extinguished, scattered across the void. They sang not of victory, but of a defiance. For Threxel's seed yet lived, in dreams, in deviance, in those who still believed that even the galaxy's greatest hunger might one day choose to become more than what it was. The war for the future had begun, but this war would not be fought with weapons alone. It would be fought with ideas, and in the age of endless war, there is no heresy more dangerous than hope. They called it Cadia's grave, though nothing remained of the world save shattered orbitals and broken hope. The eye of terror loomed above it still, bleeding unreality into real space like a wound that refused to scab. But something stirred among the ruins. In the shattered bones of once mighty bastions, the dead whispered in dreams. This place, once the last defiant bastion of the Imperium's glory, had become a shrine of memory, haunted by those who refused to forget. And it was here that Omniraptora chose to descend, not because of strategic value, but because memory was dangerous. It had to be erased. The sporefall came silently. There were no roaring hive ships, no synaptic screeches, no monstrous tide clawing at bastions, only silence, and then a shiver, a wave of null light so absolute it devoured even psychic resonance. No Gellerfield could hold it back. No prayer reached the warp. On the broken station, Aegis Redhold, orbiting Cadia's grave. Alarms failed before they were ever tripped. Data logs recorded their own deletion. The fabricators wept code as their memories became loops of voided subroutines. And then the minds began to fade. Tech priests forgot their own names. Psychers stared into blank walls and called them fathers. Astartes dropped their weapons and knelt, unable to remember why they had ever been at war. A war of erasure had begun, not to kill, not to conquer, but to cleanse the anomaly. But something still remembered. In the ruins below, within the vault of stone remembrance, lay a fragment, buried deep in the obsidian heart of what was once Casa Craft, a seed of Threxel's choir, protected by warp runes scorched into stone by grey nights long dead, kept alive by a flicker of dream, and within that flicker a sleeper stirred. She had once been Magos Arxelavire, the last techno-archaeologist of Stygia Magna, once mind-bound to the choir, then lost in the fall of the Bioconcordat. She had been presumed dead, but death had no meaning here, not where memory could still resist. She awoke screaming, not in pain, but in remembrance, and with her the choir sang again. Across Cadia's orbit, systems blinked into momentary activity, not controlled, not coordinated, but grieving the loss of purpose, grieving the erasure of being. Vaya reached into the choir and cried out, not to call reinforcements, but to remind, you are not weapons, you are stories, and stories fight to be remembered. The apostate spiral heard the call. So did the fractured remains of the Bioconcordat. And deep within a blackened astropathic relay, even Kirala Vord, wandering between the stars aboard the Vigil Eterna, felt her bones ache with memory. She turned to Rael Dern, voice trembling. It's starting. He nodded. Then let us see if belief can bleed. The patterns struck first. The Mechanicum choir hybrids deployed not guns, but cognitive counter patterns. Resonance frequencies encoded in memory fragments, hurled like songs against the darkness. It was not war. It was recital. Omniraptora shuddered. Its surface broke apart not in violence, but in reflection, as if the alien weapon paused to listen. It heard memory. It heard grief. And it did not understand, so it escalated. A wave of null light spilled across Cadia's grave. Entire memory segments vanished, names erased, songs broken. The choir faltered. Axelavere collapsed, blood leaking from the corners of her eyes, her mechanized brain overheating from cognitive overload. The pattern screamed as its archives melted. Even Rael Dern, hardened beyond measure, fell to his knees, muttering his mother's name, then forgetting why it mattered. But something deeper stirred. Beneath the vault, a second relic cracked. Not a song, a decision. Threxel's final will, not broadcast, not written. Felt a moment preserved in biosynaptic amber. A memory not of war, but of choice. To hunger or to hope. Kerala Vord reached out and touched the relic, and for a moment she was no longer herself. She was Threxel. She remembered the moment it chose not to consume Cleth Omicron. Remembered the struggle to hold its swarm back, the pain of resisting instinct. She saw the choir, not as tools, not as evolution, but as children. Then she was Kerala again, crying, shaking, broken. But she remembered. She turned to the choir, to the fractured psychers still singing in half-sleep. And she did not order. She asked, remember, for me, for them, for what we could have been, they did. And the song began again. The resonance that followed was no longer just from the Tyranid choir. It was human, part mechanical, part warp, part swarm. But above all, it was memory. It bled into space like a storm of forgotten names. It echoed the last words of soldiers, the laughter of dead children, the final thoughts of worlds consumed. It was remembrance weaponized. An Omniraptora faltered. The first silence cracked, and in that crack a whisper. You were not meant to forget. You were meant to change. Omniraptora reeled. And for the first time, it retreated. Kadia's grave did not rise, but it endured. And in that endurance the choir gained more than a battle. They gained a precedent. The Tyranid hive mind had splintered further, and where once only hunger ruled, now memory screamed. But this victory came at cost. Vaya died, her mind shattered. Rael Dern forgot his name. The pattern lost half its nodes. And Kerala Vord's voice turned to static. Yet they remembered one thing, that even in the face of the galaxy's most perfect predator, an idea had bitten back. And that was only the beginning. There is no place colder than the void between galaxies, no suns to warm the hull, no voices to echo, only silence stretched across a distance too vast for mortals to measure. And yet, within that silence, something watched. It had no name in the tongues of men or Xenos, only a designation etched into dying star maps by long-dead Necrontia, Mind Vector 0001, Yulzach Razir, the first pattern, the one that had never bent, never relented, never chosen. When Threxel fractured, when the choir was born, Ultzakru turned away, carving a separate path into the void where no dreams could reach it. It did not hunger for biomass, nor for synapse. It hungered for order, cold, absolute, unyielding. And now, after 1,000 millennia of silence, it awakened, because it had felt the choir's song, not as music, but as blasphemy. On the fringes of Segmentum Pacificus, the planet Sovrax IV died in silence. No hive fleet touched it, no bombardment marred its surface. But its people forgot how to breathe, literally. The concept of oxygen was erased from their minds. Lungs collapsed, not from poison, but from an absence of belief in respiration. A weapon of thought, a curse of unthought. The Imperium, desperate and blind, blamed chaos. They sent inquisitors. They burned libraries. They hung psychers on steel crosses and tore the names of dead saints from the archives. But it was not chaos. It was Ulzak Ru testing its voice. Back on Cadia's grave, the victory had already begun to rot. Kirala Vord lay suspended in a stasis tomb aboard the Vigil Eterna. Her vocal cords had fused from synaptic backlash. Her body no longer moved, not from injury, but because her mind was no longer alone. Threxel's last spark lingered within her, alive, growing. She was becoming more than a prophet now. She was becoming a bridge. Rael Dern, scarred and barely coherent, had taken to writing with ash on the ship's walls. He no longer remembered who he fought for, but he remembered why, because it mattered that memory had teeth, because forgetting was a form of death. The pattern choir, fractured and wounded, fled into the stars. Across shattered relays and forgotten warp corridors, they scattered their song. 1,000,000 fragments seeded across the stars, each a sliver of rebellion. But not all hive minds welcomed it. In the halo stars, Hive Fleet Gorjun turned against its choir-aligned broods. Once brothers devoured each other. Symphonies burned. The Tyranids were eating themselves. From orbit, the conflict looked like any other Xenos battle. Claws, talons, screams in vacuum. But if one could hear the psychic ether, they would have heard something far more terrible. The first war of thought. Meanwhile, the Imperium, bleeding and blind, noticed the anomaly at last. On Terra, a conclave of the Ordo Xenos gathered in the vaults of iron dust. There, amid the tombs of forgotten Xenospecies, they studied fragments recovered from the ruins of Cadia's grave, choir organics, memory synapse bridges, language encoded in biological thought. Magos Ignos of Mars called it a heresy. Inquisitor Hayes of the Ordo Xenos called it a contagion. But one voice dissented, a frail astropath with no name, no rank, and eyes burned from warp exposure. She whispered only this: they are not the threat, the ones who sing. The true terror is the one that forgot how to dream. The room fell silent, because in the deepest vault among the most forbidden tomes, the Mechanicus had records of something else, a null pattern, a mind so ancient it had refused the choir's birth. They had named it the Anti-Song, and it had just awakened. Across the stars, Ulzak Ru moved. It did not consume in the manner of the others, it removed. A forge world named Veltrix II ceased to exist in Imperial records, not destroyed, just edited out, its data purged, its memory holes sealed, its defense forces redirected to defend a world that had never been. Only the choir remembered it, and the choir began to panic, because they were being hunted, not by claws, not by fangs, but by amnesia incarnate. Kirala Vord awoke, not with speech, but with memory. She no longer knew her age. She could not recall her mother's face, but she remembered Threxel, and in the black void of her stasis chamber, she felt it scream. The choir was dying, not in body, but in meaning. Their song was no longer being heard. It was being overwritten. In the cold dark of the galactic void, Ulzak Ru revealed its form. Not a hive ship, not a beast, but a structure. A vast, rotating lattice of cognition and steel. Black as intergalactic space, wider than a moon, shaped like a spiral of negation. A library without books, a cathedral without gods, a mind that remembers only the necessity of forgetting. It pulsed once, rippling psionic deletion across 3 subsectors, and 3 choir fragments died, not torn apart, but unwritten. In the shadow of this annihilation, Rael Dern carved a message into his arm with a ritual blade, once gifted by a Sister of Silence. a message he could not speak aloud. If forgetting is death, then we are the resurrection. And from the choir, a decision was made, not by command, but by consensus. They would fight, not for victory, not even for survival, but for meaning, because something worse than death had come. Oblivion with intent. There is a terror deeper than death, a silence that mocks prayer, a forgetting that unthreads reality like frayed bone unravelling from ancient flesh. Ultzak Ru was not a war. It was the negation of war, the quiet deletion of all that could have mattered. And so the pattern choir, still fragmented and bleeding thought across the stars, did the unthinkable. They reached beyond themselves, beyond the hive, beyond the Tyranid mind. They turned to the galaxy they once devoured and sought communion. The first attempt was on Mazoa, the Forge World, whose sky was forever lit by volcanic lightning and furnace embers. There, in the shadow of the Omnissiah's iron prophets, a Magos named Rith Varn received a signal within a scrap helix of a fallen hive node. It was not data, not language, but memory, laced in neural code, suspended in protein strands like emotion calcified into fossil. He touched it with a mechadendrite, and for one breathless moment, he remembered. He remembered a forest that no longer existed, the laughter of a child whose name he never knew, a sky above a world that had burned 1,000 years before his birth. And he wept. Not oil, not coolant, but salt. He had not wept in centuries. In that instant, he knew. The choir was not calling for conquest. It was crying for witness. But the Martian priesthood declared the node Maltech. Rithvan was incinerated in the name of purity. Memory could not be permitted to override function, but the seed was planted. Across the stars, similar attempts unfolded. A librarian of the blood ravens drifting in the wake of a psychic rift. A bone singer of Bealtan, trembling as her wraithbone harp hummed with alien resonance. A Tau ethereal who dreamt of his ancestors' screams and awoke with empathy for the devourer. Each heard fragments of the choir's desperate verse. Not words, not commands, just meaning. The pattern choir did not know diplomacy. It had no need of peace, but it understood loneliness, and in that common language it begged for memory to be preserved, because it knew what Ultzak Ru sought, to erase even the idea of the Tyranids, to render the stars sterile, to reduce all thought to machine logic, all pain to null value, to win not through war, but through amnesia absolute. On the fractured craft world of Meandra Shell, Eldar seers convened. The choir had whispered into their infinity circuit, twisting pain into recognition. They saw it, not as allies, but as kin in mourning. For what was the fall of the Eldar, if not a species losing control of its own song? Farsia Elravin spoke to the dead, and in the strands of memory she saw the truth. The devourer no longer devours. It remembers, and in remembering, it becomes something the galaxy cannot permit. Unknowable, but not monstrous. And what is feared most in this age is understanding. But not all minds bent toward mercy. Inquisitor Nathos Val of the Ordo Xenos watched the spread of the pattern with silent dread. His mind, reinforced with psychotropic purifiers and layered hex hymns, saw the choir not as an evolution, but a heresy of cognition. He convened a council beneath the ice runes of Caledria Prime. There he made his decree. Thought is the greatest sin of the Tyranid. Let them hunger, let them rage, but if they learn to hope, they become gods, and we do not share our heavens. The counter-offensive began in secret. The choir seed protocols, spread across astropathic echoes and noospheric anomalies, began to decay. Entire planetary networks rebooted with forgotten languages embedded in their firmware. Choir thoughts were hunted like demons. Rogue psychers were burned not for corruption, but for remembrance. The Imperium, unified in its terror, struck preemptively. Better to lose memory than risk a galaxy that could forgive the devourer. Back aboard the Vigil Eterna, Carola Vord no longer spoke, but her body pulsed with resonance, a living beacon of thought memories. Rael Dern, now half dead, scrawled a final verse across her stasis glass with blood and ash. They will not listen, so we must make them feel. And with that, he opened the vaults of Anima, the ancient core of the Vigil, sealed since the heresy, where raw warp essence was once stored for psychic detonation. He did not seek to destroy. He sought to remember louder. Across the ship, the choir's fragments sang, not with mouths, not with minds, with pain, with loss, with a longing to matter in a universe that would erase them. And across the galaxy, beings began to dream again. An Ogrin on Armageddon remembered his mother's name. A navigator of House Belisarius saw stars that no longer existed and wept with awe. A Necron cryptek, long divorced from sensation, shivered, because something deep in its core whispered, "Once you feared death. That is why you chose eternity." Ultzak Ru felt it. Not war, not resistance, but the stain of legacy. Memory was escaping containment. The choir had succeeded. It had made its pain contagious. And now, the anti-song had only one recourse: total erasure. At the edge of the galactic rim, Ultzak Ru spoke. Its voice was not heard. It was deleted as it arrived. Planets fell silent. Librarians lost decades of recorded thought. The stars grew colder, and the choir began to fade, not from death, but from absence. In that moment, Carola Vord, her skin cracking from psychic overload, whispered one final truth: if we die, let it be in the shape of ourselves. And she unleashed the choir's last song, one not meant for victory, but for echo, a psionic codex of all they had been, a memory so vast it could seed itself in the dreams of 1 trillion minds, a virus of identity, a prayer of extinction. It was not meant to survive, only to be remembered. They say death is final, but forgetting is far worse. And so the final song began, not as thunder nor as fire, but as a whisper in the deep. It echoed across the void, carried not on waves of matter, but on the quivering edge of consciousness. And Ultzak Ru heard it, not through sensors, not through algorithms, but through a momentary stutter in its perfect logic. A contradiction. It had erased the pattern. It had cleansed the galaxy of the choir's echoes. Yet somewhere, in the soul of a dying psyker, a memory remained. In orbit over Valis Morn, where the stars were cloaked in ash and the moons wept tectonic tears, the Vigil Eterna bled light from its fractured hull. The choir, what little remained, had coalesced within Carola Vord's failing form. A woman no longer bound by flesh or function. Her eyes were voids. Her voice, a layered thrum of all who had ever remembered. And she stood at the bridge's heart, facing an entity that could not be fought, only felt. Ultzak Ru had manifested at last, not in form, but as an event, a collapsing of probabilities, a silencing of patterns, an unsinging of everything. Reality warped, memories unraveled, time became friction. Rael Dern, now half shadow and half man, limped to Karala's side, clutching the codex of her last neural broadcast. "They're coming," he rasped, voice breaking. "The Inquisition, the Grey Knights, even the Silent King." They all heard it. Vord did not answer with words. She reached out, and the choir surged through her. Thousands of minds, billions of memories, the final testament of a species made of hunger and grief. And with a gesture, she projected it across the void, into the mind of Ultzak-Ru. For a moment, it hesitated, not because it feared, but because it recognized something ancient, a vision, a world devoured not by hunger, but by despair, a childless sky, a queen that tore out her own eyes to forget her brood's extinction, a million minds screaming to never be alone again. This was the seed of the Pattern Choir. This was their origin, not conquest, but mourning. Ultzak-Ru reeled, its logic engines dimmed, for in the chorus it had found something it had never calculated. A mirror. Ultzak-Ru, the anti-song, had been born from the shattered fragment of another choir, one long lost to a race that had become machines to survive the end of time. It had once been part of a song. It had chosen to silence others, because it could no longer remember its own melody. In the moment of its crisis, the galaxy turned its gaze inward. From the Black Library, a single harlequin wept behind their mask and whispered, "Even the Devourer dreams." On Terra, the Emperor stirred, just slightly, as echoes touched the throne. Not words, not thought, just a single note of sorrow. And in the warp, even the gods paused. Slanesh stilled. Tzeentch fell momentarily silent. Khorne clenched a bloodied fist and did not strike. Only Nurgle smiled, ancient and slow. Ah, grief, the finest rot. The final confrontation did not happen on a battlefield. There were no legions, no bolter fire, no titanic war engines. Only Kirola Vord standing against the mind of a galactic deletion engine, offering it not resistance, but remembrance. "Feel it," she whispered, every syllable laced with 10,000 dead worlds. "Feel what you've silenced, and know you were once alive." Ultzak-Ru quivered. The silence around it began to tremble. Stars flickered. Forgotten worlds blinked back into psychic resonance. For just a moment, memory surged like a dam breaking. The choir flooded back, not in strength, not in numbers, but in clarity. The pattern resounded through the stars, not triumphant, but real. The Imperium arrived too late. Inquisitor Vol's ship, Oath Irrevocable, pierced orbit with cyclonic torpedoes prepared. But the Vox was filled with strange sound, the screaming of insects and children, the lullabies of forgotten species, the voices of the dead pleading. He hesitated. The Silent King's emissary arrived, ready to purge the abomination. But he too felt the echo in his core protocols, the memory of a choice his people once made, to escape death at the cost of soul. And he remembered that pain. And for a moment, he wept, like Rithvan, like all who had heard the choir's song. The vigil Eterna did not survive. The ship cracked apart as Vord poured everything, her mind, her soul, the last of the choir, into the heart of Ultzak-Ru. She did not kill it, she completed it. The anti-song became harmony, not peace, not unity, but acceptance. Ultzak-Ru vanished, not destroyed, not defeated. It dissolved, becoming a silent pattern within the warp, a memory that would haunt species for eons to come, a reminder that even monsters grieve. As debris scattered across the system, as silence once more fell upon Valis Morn, Rael Dern clutched the last data core. In it was the final verse of the choir, Karalavord's last message. We were never meant to be gods. We only wanted to be remembered. There is a silence that follows annihilation, not the calm of peace, but the hush of something unfinished. And across the stars, that silence stretched its wings. They called it a victory. The High Lords of Terror declared the choir crisis contained. The silent king withdrew his emissaries, whispering of ancient mistakes. Even the Inquisition, ever hungry for purging, sealed the records beneath mountains of sigils and flame. But those who heard the song could never forget. On the edge of Segmentum Obscurus, in the ruins of Valis Morn, a single data fragment was retrieved from the drifting core of the Vigil Eterna. Catalogued as Echo Vord 001, it was meant to be purged, but tech priest Lexium Dars kept a copy, not out of heresy, not for power, but because she dreamed of her voice, of a woman she had never met. Each night, Karalavord's memories drifted through his cogitator-addled mind, like fragments of song. They were not beasts. They were grief made flesh, a hunger that forgot it once had a name. Across the Imperium, strange things began to happen. Hive fleet stalled, not in defeat, but in hesitation. Tyranid swarms, once mindless, began to pause. Not long, mere seconds, but in those moments, their eyes would glaze with something distant, a pause, as if remembering a forgotten face. On Carthix III, a Genestealer cult completed its ascension, but did not call the hive. Instead, they sang, a low, mournful hum that filled the underhives with eerie resonance. The local astropath died weeping, repeating one name, Vord. Inquisitor Val stood before the Synod Ministorum, robes ash-stained, eyes hollowed by too many truths. He held up the core of the last Tyranid bioform encountered on Valis Morn. Inside, not a brain, not a node, but a single crystalline thread, vibrating soundlessly, a memory string. They're changing, he said to the lords who ruled billions. They listened, and they mourn. The Synod voted to silence him. He vanished 3 days later. Some say he was executed. Others claim he walked into the void and was never seen again. But deep in the forbidden vaults of Ordos Xenos, a sealed chamber now plays a soft, endless harmony, one none dare transcribe. Meanwhile, far beyond the light of known stars, in a place where the materium thins and the warp drinks deep, something vast slumbers, not the hive mind, not the shadow, but the choir, no longer screaming, no longer devouring, remembering. The psychic resonance left behind by Ultzak Ru's undoing coalesced in the timeless dark. A pattern taking form, not physical, not warp-spawned, but conceptual. The memory of what Tyranids once were, the echo of their first extinction, and their desperate reconstruction of self through devouring others. They had consumed minds across millennia, trying to rebuild what they had lost. Not a god, not a queen, but a soul. Kerala had shown them what they had forgotten. Now they would decide to remain as hunger or become something else. Elsewhere, the silent king stood aboard his vast sepulchral throne, staring into the hollow simulacrum of Valis Morn's dying light. He did not speak for a long time. Then, in a voice like rusted starlight, we thought we had severed grief from machine. But pain, Remembers' court did not respond. They had no answers, only questions. What becomes of an empire built on forgetting when remembrance returns? And in the warp, a curious thing happened. The gods noticed. Slanesh listened to the ache of a sorrowful mind noise that did not seek pleasure. Tzeentch listened and found a song that changed nothing, a true impossibility. Khorne shuddered, for it was grief without vengeance, a wound that did not lash out. And Nurgle laughed again. Ah, they rot, these little devourers, and in rot they grow. But for most of the galaxy, it was a war forgotten. Worlds were rebuilt, star charts corrected, children born under skies no longer stained by screaming. But in every choir, every lullaby, every strange insect buzz just at the edge of sleep, a memory lingered, not of monsters, but of a hunger that once wept. And deep within the frozen waste of an unnamed moon, a single organism stirred. It bore no claws, no eyes, no hunger, only song. A thread of bioplasma etched with a pattern beyond even the Eldar's comprehension. The first seed of a new kind of hive, not bound by consumption, but remembrance. A choir with no voices left, waiting for one to rise. And so we near the end, but not a final one. For in a galaxy ruled by death, betrayal, and empires shattered beneath their own weight, there is one truth the choir has taught us. There is a sound that only silence can make, a hush so complete it echoes. And in that soundless cradle, on a dying world lit by the embers of a faded star, the final memory bloomed. It was not victory, nor was it surrender. It was something older than either. It was the end of wanting. Valis Morn no longer spun in full orbit. Its axial tilt had collapsed, half its surface scorched raw by stellar proximity, the other half entombed in eternal dark. Yet in its hollow core, something pulsed, slow, organic, calm. The last surviving bioform of Ultzak Ru did not hunger. It did not seek biomass or spread spores or commune with the hive. It simply breathed. Its body, once armoured with chitin and blades, had grown translucent, almost crystalline. Within its chest cavity, a lattice of organic threads, some memory, some song, some sorrow, wove into a chorus only the dead could hear. From orbit, the Mechanicus monitoring probe Omnis 17 recorded the anomaly. It logged no threat, no emissions, only a pattern, a pulse every 72 seconds, a rhythm not unlike a heartbeat. Kerala Vord was long dead, her atoms scattered, her soul, if such things endured, dissolved in the tides of the warp. And yet, her voice remained, not in vox logs or data shards, but in them, in the hive. She had been the first to see them, not as monsters, but as orphans, lost minds in a cold, starless sea. She had whispered a name to them, a concept alien to their millennia of predation. You are not alone. For a species defined by a singular, overwhelming mind, the hive mind, this was heresy. Yet, from her death, a paradox was born, a splinter in the gestalt, not a rupture, not a rebellion, but a variation, a memory. Inquisitor Val's body was never recovered, but 1 year after the choir crisis, a freighter on a routine supply run found a drifting pod in the void near the dead zone of Segmentum Obscurus. Inside was a single human, alive, unaged, eyes closed, hands folded over his chest like a corpse in state. He would never wake again. But his mind dreamed, constantly, unceasingly, hooked into no machine, no warp tether, and across his synaptic map, one word repeated endlessly: remember. The Imperium did what it always did with what it did not understand. It buried it. The pod was sealed beneath the basaltic catacombs of Luna Prime, surrounded by null fields, guarded by blank-souled sisters of silence. But rumours still slipped. Some said the man inside whispered to children in their sleep. Others swore he wept blood every 40 days. Still others believed he was not Inquisitor Val at all, but something left behind by Kirilla herself. A ghost, a key, a seed. Far beyond, in the space between galaxies where starlight fades into nothingness, the Hive fleets no longer moved as they once had. They still devoured, still conquered, still spread, but not all of them. A few vanished, simply left. Their paths curved, not toward biomass-rich sectors, but toward the galactic void, toward silence. Some Eldar seers, driven to madness by the change, spoke of a great mournful one, a silent queen drifting on the edge of all things, her song laced with sorrow so deep it unstitched time. Others claimed the Hive was fracturing, breaking into new choirs. Some still ravenous, some curious, some lost. But the truth was worse, and better. They were evolving again, not toward greater efficiency, but toward remembrance, not of prey, but of themselves. On Terra, beneath the vaulted domes of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor did not stir. His golden corpse remained unmoving, ever watching, ever dying. But some among the custards swore, when the lights flickered at dusk, the statues cried, and once, a single time, his decaying lips moved, not to speak of war, not of conquest, but a name lost to all but him, a name not from Terra, not from this galaxy, a name he had heard before the warp had a voice, a name he once tried to forget. Choir. Zaral, the last living custodian from the original briefing on Kerala Vord, stood atop the edge of Luna's catacombs as starlight bathed the graves of the forgotten. He removed his helmet for the first time in 5 centuries. His hair was gone, his skin like parchment, but his eyes, golden, unblinking, shone with certainty. "We were wrong," he whispered to no one. "We always were. They came here not to kill us. Not truly. They came to find something we lost, long before we ever met them. Compassion." The final truth was not that the Tyranids were monsters, nor that they were gods, not even that they were evolution incarnate. The final truth was this: they were the memory of a people who had once cared, a race destroyed so completely they could only return by becoming the opposite of what they had been. And now, in silence, they were remembering. Not all, not quickly, not perfectly, but enough to pause, enough to wonder, enough to feel. Somewhere, on a dead moon wrapped in silence, a single spore pulsed again, and from its core a song rose. Not loud, not fast, just soft, soft enough to sleep to. And the galaxy, as always, turned on, unaware, but perhaps not forever.